another YouTube watercolor tutorial by Andrew Broussard. If you are new to this channel, I like to go through the setup process. If you are used to the setup process, you can jump ahead, probably about 5 minutes jump. I'm also going to talk about what I'm going to experiment with for today. So I have a quarter sheet of Stonehenge Aqua. This is 100% cotton paper. I tore it into the quarter. And so it's an 11 by 15 inch size. Pretty good standard size to lay a mat over. So I binder clip it to the board underneath. That allows me to kind of stretch it as I paint. And I'm just soaking it with water. And this is a medium-sized Ron Ranson Hake brush. Somebody in comments somewhere had asked on social media what a Hake brush was. Hake brush is a oriental brush made from, I believe, goat hair, and it is used to put in kind of large swashes of water and whatnot. There's a few different traditional versions of it. The traditional versions are a lot fluffier. This one has a few bamboo pieces. It came like this, and you can break them into the size that you need. The Ron Ranson brush, and there's Hake brushes that have handles like this as well, very common. But the Ron Ranson brush is a little bit more chiseled edge and worn in, so it allows for different effects and more use throughout the painting, rather than kind of an initial wash or broad strokes. Anyway, now on to setting up the palette and talking about today's experiment. So not last night, but the night before, I was up late painting because during this whole global issue, crisis, time has essentially no meaning since we're just kind of at home all hours. There's no work, nothing taking place. So I was up late painting, and it was kind of just like a free-for-all type painting. It's this is number 89. I haven't uploaded that video yet, but it'll be uploaded soon. It's number 87. And near the end, I started experimenting and demonstrating a lot of stuff with gouache. Now, if you haven't heard my spiel on gouache is, people love it, hate it, or don't care. So there's 3 groups with it. And gouache, what it is in its original form, it's just kind of a thick white watercolor paint. I believe it came about in the 1800s. Prior to that, maybe they used chalk on top of watercolor painting and sketches and drawings and whatnot. And in the 1800s, there was a lot of art critics that came out and taught people how to read art and what to appreciate. Because there was a lot of people painting during that time period. I think they had travel boxes, watercolor boxes that were made and sold. And I think one company made like 1 million of them and put them out there. And I think this was in the 1800s. So there was a lot of people painting, Victorian era, taking on an art, studying, experiment, and whatnot. And, there was like a lot of experimentation with art in general during that time period in the 1800s. And then leading into the 1900s and continuing. So I think, people were trying to differentiate groups and whatnot. And I think the argument against gouache was that it started to take away the feel of watercolor and push it more towards oil, potentially. There's arguments for why that's right. There's arguments for why that's wrong. But I think that was the main argument, was that was taking away from the feel of watercolor. Essentially, with gouache, it is the same make as watercolor, but the pigments are less ground. So watercolor will separate and disperse and fall within the holes within this the paper opening up as it gets wet or as it's applied and whatnot. While here, I believe it has a tendency to sit higher on top of the paper because of the ground not being as ground up. So that's gouache. Then apparently, then there are a whole bunch of different colors of gouache and whatnot. And gouache found its own way in art. And here's like a cerulean blue by I think this is the Talons brand. It found its own way in art as a designer for designers and whatnot. They would paint with it. It would dry matte, and it would be a lot easier to photograph and scan, and would just be easier during, I guess it was like the 1900s in America, or wherever in the country, wherever in the world for that. And so it found its place there. I don't think it was as light fast. And then it seems like, I'm not too sure about the history of gouache and when it became like kind of an art on its own, or people are just doing gouache paintings and hang them up. But I think that was the big use of it, was within industry. But there's like just such amazing gouache painters out there. There's Gurney, who has a whole bunch of stuff about gouache out there. I think he's written books and whatnot, and really awesome. There's also Gouache Sketchers on Facebook. It's a YouTube group. So that's something you might want to check out if you're into gouache. Now, the color gouache, apparently, back in the day, to differentiate, was actually called body color, where I believe they took the white gouache and mixed in to the colors on the palette. And that's what we're actually going to experiment with today. So I'll talk about that later on. So our palette, there's a few things we have to add. I like to clean the palette first, spritz with the water bottle. We have our, I'm going to go with this, my regular palette with this one. And some of the things might be omitted, so I'll name as we utilize them, but I'll just talk to you real quick about it. Light red oxide to compare to Venetian red, alizarin, burnt umber, burnt sienna, raw sienna, lemon yellow. We're not going to get any cerulean in there. We have the phthalo blue, which might come in, ultramarine blue, Payne's gray, which I need to refill, lamp black, which I've been playing around with as I've been playing around with the gouache, kind of like light and dark, and sap green. But the sap green, we might ignore that as well. So I'm going to refill my Payne's gray on here. I am not going to put gouache on the palette. With gouache on the palette, it contaminates the paints around it too quickly. It has a chalky flow to it. So we're going to use the gouache as an experiment near the end of the painting. So if you want to jump ahead towards near the end of the painting, that's where the gouache experiment will most likely take place. Okay, so my paper is stretched. I'm going to let it sit flat, saturated with water. We're going to build up a probably a composition I've done before, because I really want to focus more on the experiment near the end. I think we'll do an interior stream photo painting. We've done something like that before. We'll change the layout, we'll change the pond and whatnot. So we'll go for like a tonalist type interior one. I usually take sap green and the Venetian red mixture for that, but I'm going to differentiate from my normal painting method from in that regard. This is kind of just a little bit of the earth reds. Put something light in the sky. Now there's a few different uses for gouache throughout a painting. I have not experimented with it early on in a painting, but it's feasible. A lot of people that, if you read art books and whatnot, they'll often say, you know, I don't have gouache on the palette, but, you know, JMW Turner had it, and, you know, if it was good for him, you know, it could be good for anybody. JMW Turner, if you're not familiar with him, was a prolific watercolorist and oil painter in England. He is just a very important part of art history. So give JMW Turner a checking out. That was ultramarine right there. And he would use it for different effects. One thing he'd use it for that I haven't tried it yet, and people would talk about in the art books, they'd be like, oh yeah, you know, they put it in the sky as like a hazy effect. So that's something to explore down the line. Okay, so my sky, I'm just gonna leave it like that. Let's grabbing a Venetian red, ultramarine. You could do the light red. Oh God, excuse me. That was a sneeze and a half. Let me throw that away. Okay. This will give you a purplish mixture. You could use the light red oxide instead. Purple for kind of a far background type thing. I'm mixing a heavier mixture because I want these masses to be stronger in concentration. I may come back over them later on and either do a lighter recession or whatnot, but I think this is what we'll play with. Paint to the edges of the paper. That, I think, we don't really have too many rules, or I've tried to avoid giving, like, you know, straight up rules and all that with painting. But I think that's something that is just something you have to do. Paint to the edges to give you, even if the matte comes to here, to really create that idea that we're not just centering everything in here, that the world expands around it. I'm going to warm this up with burnt sienna. It's quite a bit of burnt sienna, so I'm going to add a little bit of ultramarine to cool it off. Ooh, that's my stomach. Wow. My body's like, you need to eat, I guess, and sneeze. But I really wanted to make this video. I was getting ready for the video, and my mom, who I don't know if she's up to date on all the videos and whatnot, but she was teasing me about the videos this morning. She was like, oh well, you could learn from Rusty, who is my my parents' dog. You can learn from his YouTube page how to pick up sticks in the yard, because we were doing yard work yesterday, and she was telling me about all these tutorials that the dog was loading up on YouTube. So, so it was pretty silly. And I was like, Mom, I have a great idea for a painting. I gotta go. And she was just messaging me about all that. Let's leave some of these whites here. This is just that mixture where I kind of threw the burnt sienna in kind of to warm it up, to bring it closer to us. So aerial perspective, as you recede, you go more blue and purple and blue and whatnot. As you come forward, you get more red, orange, etc. So let's set a little reflection here. I like to put reflections in before the object is created. I'm going to create a tree mass in this area and really build it up. We're going to have a tree mass come up here. So this area is going to get quite dark. So I'm going to just take my Payne's Gray at this point and toss that right in there and say, okay, that's where my super dark's going to be. Then the paper is still wet, and when I'm working with water, I like to have that wet effect to kind of disperse it. Here as well, we're going to have another mass. I really do enjoy Payne's Gray in water. It will dry quite soft, and I'll wind up going over it. But that's something I really, really enjoy. Let's see. I have Payne's Gray on here, which is fine because the bottom of the tree mass is going to be dark, and I can use it to shape out this tree structure. Put it like that. Now, this is a good time for me to talk about the, I guess the meat and potatoes would be the phrase. And if you're not familiar with that, that's kind of the main course phrase. The driving home, what the experiment is. I've been playing with the Hake brush, obviously, and then this is what I use almost exclusively to paint. I'll use this, and I'll use the rigger brush, paper towel, card to scrape, razor blade, different things for different textures. Now, Hake, because I prefer a fast and loose approach to painting, but there's a few different stages of trees that I've been noticing and that I've been experimenting with. I've been looking at the master landscape painters from the 1800s, Hudson River Valley School, and looking at their tree compositions and whatnot, and trying to see how I could do it in watercolor, or at least get an effect from it. And one thing that I noticed was that we could get a softness around the edge for a wet and wet stage. And that gives you that backlit coming through the thinner areas of the tree. And then as you get closer towards the inside of the tree, you're going to get darker. You have a bigger mass and whatnot, especially if it's backlit. So that was the first thing that I'd seen. And usually I'd take raw sienna, and I'll probably do that. Put raw sienna in this wet and wet stage. It gives a nice dispersed glow around it. So you'll see that relatively frequently within these paintings. I'm going to bring this all the way up here and bring an object in here. And in the wet and wet stage, everything kind of softens, gives an interesting effect to it. Then I would dry off and use the Hake again for a more defined, crisper feel to the leaves and whatnot. Then I realized that we could take the gouache mix it with the watercolor, and then stipple that on top of that second layer to get a third defined layer. So still using the same tool by changing the water concentration, the saturation, the wetness of the paper, we can get multiple different effects. So we could get a soft effect, and as the paper dries, you can get different effects before it's even dried. Then on the dry, you can get a crisper effect. And then from there, with the gouache, we could get a third standout closer to us effect. So that's the goal and the whole point of this this video, is to do that experiment on that last stage and see how it affects for us. So I hope that made sense, and I might reiterate it later on. Now, I do want to put that glow in around the edges. We could also get textural effects by softening with a paper towel around the edges. I'm trying to keep in mind the top of the trees having a variety. I don't want them at the same point stopping. So we have a pattern taking place. So at this point, I want to show you the water that I have. This is the first time I'm actually doing a clean off of the brush. You could also simply clean off the brush with a paper towel. Now, the brush is a little wet. I'm going to grab some raw sienna, and I want to be careful. When I'm still doing wet and wet, you want to decrease the amount of water that you're using and increase pigment load. Reason being is if you do not do that, you'll start getting those cauliflower effects. To show you, this is just a wet rigger brush, just water. There you go. You see how that does that? That is the cauliflower effect, and that just shows you from water concentration what is happening right there. You can use it to your advantage and pull out shapes and whatnot, pull out trunks and whatnot. But when putting in color and whatnot, etc. So I'm just going to play around just so you can see. That is how you can take advantage of the cauliflower effect. But a lot of people will struggle with it happening when they're trying to add color within it. So increase your concentration of color, and that will prevent that from happening. Okay? And decrease the water load. So I'm putting this around the edge, the outside, to grab that glow. I could put separate masses of this by itself, as if it was just a very thin part coming off, a very thin bush or something. And that's something for you to experiment with. Also, you could very beautifully take Venetian red or light red, or even raw sienna, burnt sienna, sorry, any of those earth reds, and add that for a reddish glow within here as well. So those two have been prominent in my recent paintings to get that that effect. So wet and wet around the edges of a tree structure in order to give it life. Now we're still wet and wet, and we can maintain here for a while. We can experiment with it. I can increase concentrations. In a bit, we're going to use the blow dryer to dry it all off and then do the next stage. But in all seriousness, you could keep playing with this as it dries. You can keep moving it forward toward you all. Here is a ultramarine burnt umber combination. One thing we can do, and what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, I'm going to experiment with just wiping and opening right there. And maybe lifting an opening right there. And we'll stipple over it, like we'll treat it closely as if that's there. We might need to take a little bit of blue, get that sky look in there. But, you know, playing around that spot, maybe making a little opening in the trees. I find personally that effect is a lot easier for me to do with oil painting, where I could wipe it out and then do that. But that's something that I need to experiment with more in watercolor. Actually, I mean, that's somewhere you could use the cauliflower effect to open it. Let's do that right now. This is just a wet brush. There we go. We'll open that spot up. So I think that's pretty helpful, and you could just dab, that'll help a little bit more. The thing about the cauliflower is you kind of get those weird edges. You also get that effect if you splatter, I don't know if I mentioned, just straight water onto a white and wet painting. Now, whenever you get a brush hair, you can use another brush to try to lift it off. Let's see. Let's get Payne's Gray. Kind of darken up our ultramarine. And let's grab a little lemon yellow. See if we get a little green effect, like a dark green. Yeah. So it's blue with a slight tinge of green. And this is building up the mass. So speaking of mass, happy Passover, happy Easter, whatever y'all celebrate out there. Hope y'all are staying safe, and you know, be careful with traveling and whatnot. I mean, please, you know, consider staying home and keeping your loved ones safe. But, you know, I hope you guys have a wonderful time. Bringing some of this down in here. Looks like we're pretty dry in the water area. Now let's grab just kind of more Payne's Gray. We haven't done a dry off yet, but this kind of harkens back to what I said earlier about how you can just continue painting without doing a dry off and just adding your pigment load. And that would give you an interesting effect. And that might be something you want to adopt into your repertoire just to try differently, or something that you might want to adopt just as your style itself, where you just kind of paint as the painting dries. I'm going to mix it dark. Probably just grab Payne's Gray. Let's just do that. And we're going to start putting in some branch structures. trunks. Kind of helpful to put them in this stage to get that kind of softness. And it helps build up layers. I find that I don't know if I'm constantly revising my theory of art and landscape painting, but I think that tonality is very important. I don't think it's definitely more important than color. There's like lights and darks. And then I think that texture is very important for me. And then I also think that layering kind of goes back to the whole tonality, lights and darks, where I could put this in, it's soft, and then on top of it, with a different texture, with a different tone, we can create depth. Paint the guy off the page just to practice what I preach. Payne's gray. Actually, bringing that across and let that sit like a layer on top of the water. That's one thing I've noticed with water that I need to experiment with more, and I want you to look for in paintings and in real life. You can see the surface of the water, and you also see the reflection of the object. The reflection of the object will seem to be coming from within sometimes the water, as if it's down in it. And the surface of the water, you can create an effect like that over it. So that was an incidental thing right there, but it's something that I will talk about more in the future. Just before this whole crisis, I mean, the crisis was taking place, but before they canceled the schools in Louisiana, I was in the unit with my physics class. This is just Payne's gray, just darken up some areas with reflection and light. And what happens with a mirror, and I think I'll do a video on that to kind of explain, where light rays come together from a mirror, like being bounced off of it, if you look at the paths that they take, if you trace them, they seem to generate from within a mirror. While a curved mirror, like think of a satellite dish, the rays that come in will come together at that point, and they seem to generate the image at a point outside the mirror. So different types of mirrors create images in front or back of them, and water acts like a flat mirror, a flat plane, so it appears to come from inside. Hopefully I didn't turn you all off by talking too much science right there. With my and I'm just taking Payne's gray, and I'm just kind of putting it in textures and whatnot. Then we'll do a dry off and play around with the gouache. With reflections and water's edge, go up and down with that. Get a little bit up and below. And catch it in both directions, the reflection. Okay. So my physics class, I had 12 kids in the whole school of 600 take my physics class. It's not a requirement. It's an optional class for core four is what they call it. They could take biology 2 or something else. It's Payne's gray and burnt umber. So with those students, it's core four is college bound, and I taught like theory like that, but I tried to really harp on the mathematics portion of it within the college setting, and most of them are going to wind up taking physics in college because it's kind of a core class for the engineering or medical school or kinesthesiology and whatnot. And I really harped on the mathematics portion of it, and to show them how the math, if you analyze what the math is saying, it tells you exactly where the image is coming from. Like if I was to show you all the mirror form, there's a formula for mirrors for where the image distance would be based off of the curvature of the mirror in a flat mirror. I could show you all that the image, the math for it, the location would be negative, meaning it would come from within the mirror. And that's what I tried harping on with my students, is that these formulas tell you everything about what you need to know. A positive and negative, it all means something within it. And a lot of people have trouble with the physics in college, so I wanted to prepare them so they'd at least get a B or an A in that class. Be less stressed out whenever they taking that. I'm kind of darkening this area right here just because we are going to have quite a bit, and I do want that darkening drama. Stand up, see if anybody came into the live chat to follow along. Let's see. I have Joe Menza messaging me, asking if I will use water oils at all. I'll message him back later on. Joe Menza is a fantastic gentleman. He has a YouTube page. He paints with the Hake brush. He follows the Ron Ranson palette as well. And he has been experimenting with gouache as well. So me and him have been kind of talking about just trying to tear down that misconception or that view towards gouache, and that it isn't a viable thing in watercolor. So check out Joe Menza if you don't know him. He has a lot of great stuff. So we can keep playing with this, and like I said, you don't have to do a dry off. You could just keep on increasing your pigment concentration, let the paper slowly dry underneath, and just have fun with it. Okay, I'm going to do a dry off. Ready? All right, so did the first dry off. Things are still damp, but we'll get the effect that we want. I am going to switch gears with colors, though. The Payne's Gray, Ultramarine, Earth Tone combination will often give me, or at least for me, gives me kind of a distilled down effect, which is totally fine, but I want to try to get a little bit more green in here. So I could either literally just go to sap green. If people talk about building up a palette and whatnot, they'll say, have a green maybe as a convenience color because it's, easily accessible. I could just grab that green right now. However, the thing that people often watch out for with a convenience color is that I could take that green and just overdo it. So if I take that green, I'd want to play around with it and push it in different directions. I'd want to mix ultramarine in it to push it a little bit blue and cool it down. I can mix the burnt sienna in there or any of the earth tone reds to turn it towards the brown direction. I can push around that convenience color. Alternatively, I could take phthalo blue and go through the earth tones, and surprisingly, you start getting greens taking place. Ultramarine lemon yellow would give you a green. Payne's gray and lemon yellow would give you a green as well. Even a lamp black might potentially give you a green mixed with a yellow. That is how I think greens are achieved in the Zorn palette, which is a 4-color black-white palette. Okay, so I'm going to wipe off this middle right here. And while I'm wiping that off, I'll make the decision on what path I want to take for y'all. We have somebody watching live. How's it going? It's Mr. WB. I think it's a Mr. I'm not sure if it's a Mr. or Mrs., but I apologize. That's wrong. Okay, so it's time to make a decision. Let's do phthalo blue. Now, phthalo blue is a really strong color. I think it was developed in the 1930s. I think Winsor and Newton were the first people to utilize it. I think they might have actually called it Winsor blue. Mixing raw sienna in it. And I got a green from it. And I could have also used like lemon yellow and all that. Okay, so now we got some green going. We are going to have to darken this green up a little bit. We might have to get some more water on the brush. But this is kind of the second kind of effect you can get with the Hake brush that I was talking about, where we put that initial wet and wet layer in, and now we can do a stippling and get another texture, get it darker. I'm going to have to get some more water. Let's mix in burnt sienna. You just got to be careful with the phthalo blue because it can look unnatural. Another thing, pigment-wise, a lot of pigments that are available are often dictated by, I guess, like textile industry, automotive, and all that, because those are where pigments are really used. So pigments that are available and developed are often finding their start in places like that. Unfortunately, this is just coming out as just a stronger dark on top of that layer that I'd put in place, which I'm fine with. It gives that tonalist feel, but some people might not like that moodiness of it. So if you want, I will grab some sap green and show that on top. That adds a little bit of green tone to it. Okay. Now, here's where I really wanted to now experiment. So I'm just kind of wiping off the brush. Phthalo blue also seems to stain brushes, so make sure you gotta give it like a little bit more attention when you wash it. I have this pot, which is actually was reminded to me by the person who's currently watching live, WB, had said that he put his I think black and other things in a separate pot or had a porcelain dish, and that helps prevent the contamination of other colors on the palette. So I'm going to put a little bit more gouache here. Actually, I don't even really need that much. I could leave this gouache the way it is. And I'll try to reconstitute it. Okay. So, kind of getting it reconstituted. Now, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to make sure this brush is clean because I don't want to, like I said, contaminate. I'm going to grab some sap green. Now, I could have put sap green on here. I could have also gotten one of those porcelain dishes, which I have somewhere. It's a round circle. And I could put the white gouache in the middle and different colors on the outside. All right, so I put a little bit here. Now, I'm going to take my gouache and mix it in with this guy. Now this will sit a lot more prominent. And this is kind of what I was talking about, where I put some sap green in and I kind of just blend it in. So you've seen that before. Now if I take it and if I dot this in here like this, and I'll show you in a second what happens. So let's just put that in a little bit. Now I'm going to dry it off. Okay, so it's more or less dried. So if you recall, I had taken some sap green and stippled it in, and it kind of just got blended in with everything else. Sap green with gouache sits on top. So this adds us another potential layer effect with the fast and loose. I was stippling with the rigger brush to show you that effect, but let's take the hake, dry it off, kind of like we had done stippling earlier. Get this gouache sap green mixture and put that on top, and let's see if it's showing up in the video. I might just need to mix a little bit of a higher concentration of it, and I will put a little bit more gouache on this pan. Sap green, gouache, and look at that. Look how that color is now prominent and lays on top. So if we had a dark black background in that tree, if I went super black with that, which is an experiment for down the road, you can see how it adds an extra concept of definition. And look how fast I was able to do that with the hake brush. So it's staying within that fast and loose feel and using that hake while also adding another potential dimension. So hopefully through that, the point was driven home that you can use gouache as a viable method for another layer in a painting, to put lights on top of darks, which is hard for watercolor. You know, you're supposed to paint, or people traditionally say paint light to dark, but if you wanted to go in reverse, you can do that. Now, this is lamp black, and I'm putting this into contrast. A little bit of raw sienna, just to kind of get that landmass edge going. It might have been a little too warm with that raw sienna right there, but it's all good. Let's see. Oh, by the way, remember, I have a Patreon account. If you'd like to support and check it out, I have like really cheap options on there. It's just to help, you know, keep this channel running and free, and, you know, to help me purchase some more supplies. If you aren't able to, or if you don't want to, that's totally fine. I am not offended at all. The biggest thing I can get from y'all is y'all watching and subscribing, you know, and just feedback. If there's any questions that you have, any comments, please leave them in the YouTube channel comment below. And I'll try to address them as soon as possible. I think it might be 100 for 100 unless I just never missed one or two, you know. I try to respond to everything. I have an Etsy page if you're interested in ever purchasing any of these. It's Andrew B. Watercolors, and I have a link down below. So I have my watercolors and some oils up there. I'm thinking I'm going to do the pen and ink stuff up there as well. Yesterday I did a self-portrait, the first time in 10 years that I did a portrait of any type. We had done quite a bit of that in college in 2007, and my most recent might have actually been 2010, 2011. And I'm thinking about potentially expanding into portraiture, or at least fast and loose portraiture, like a tonalist approach to it. Been looking at the works of Dennis Sheehan, who is, I'm a big fan of him, amazing painter. He's a tonalist, and you know, check him out. But he does these fast and loose portraiture studies that are just out of this world. I can't believe it. And yeah, we could actually take some blacks and put some black in here. I do have some gouache on this brush, so I do need to clean it. You could see, I don't know if you could see in the water. No, you can't see the water that well. And when I mix it in, it does do a cloud effect in that water too. And it shows that it's kind of that chalky. Yes. Let's get some lamp black. Accentuate some spots. Also, if you made it this far in the video, feel free to follow along. Follow along and share your results. I would love to see them. On Instagram, I'm Andrew Broussard Watercolors. So just do like the @ Andrew Broussard Watercolors if you post a painting that you did following one of these tutorials. Somebody did that recently, and it really made my day seeing that. And I think I looked at it and I was like, I know that exact painting, that the tutorial that they were looking at. So like I said, stuff like that is I just really appreciate it, and I'd love to see that stuff from y'all. Let's we could do some foreground trunk type stuff. And the reason I'm doing this, you could omit this thing completely. It's just I'm having fun. I enjoy experimenting, and yeah, that's all there is to it. I mean, the painting could have easily been said it was done a moment ago, but do this. So this is the lamp black. I'm trying to keep it as like pigmented as possible so it really sits on top of that background. I always do like having a partner tree coming off, or vines and whatnot. So that's what I'm doing right here, just kind of a partner tree. And maybe I'll do a little bit more gouache in a second. Just bringing these guys off the page. And this is just the rigor. I try to harp on not doing like parallel lines. Be careful how you crisscross lines. Like, things get thinner as they move away from it. So watch out for that as well. Let's see. We'll let that guy dry. And I'll show you something else with the gouache that I found that I liked. Take a little bit of gouache and put it as like kind of a wash over the background. And that can kind of give a softening effect. It can give a fog effect potentially, some atmospheric look. You may like it, you may not. You could even kind of brush it into the sky if you want. One thing I don't know if I mentioned earlier was that I had read some people in the 1800s would actually prep their paper with gouache. They'd do a layer, and I guess maybe that would make the pigment stand out more when you painted over it. So this is just a light wash of gouache. I mean, a little bit of dirty water in there too, so let's see if you like it or not. Let's do a dry off, and we might be considering this one done in a moment. let's accentuate this tree with gouache. And let's mix it with the raw sienna. Let's see what we can get. And rather than straight white, okay, some people might like that effect, some people might not. So this is just another example of body color where I took watercolor from the palette and mixed it into the gouache, and that helped me get things to stand out a little bit more. And let's move this. Let's move that. Let's get this dried. Gotta sign it. Andrew Broussard. See how it looks with the mat over it. Thank you all for following along. And I will see you all soon. Sorry about that with the camera just now. I should have picked up the camera a moment ago. I think it flipped over the orientation. Well, there you go. All right, have a great day, and I'll see you all soon.